my fellow Americans. It is another lovely day here in Washington, D.C., coming to you straight from the Frontier House, the startup sanctuary, your home away from home here in the nation's capital, as you know. It looks like we're in week 4 of Operation Epic Fury. It's costing about $900 million a day. In the world of the Department of War, that's actually not that bad, considering that we are pounding the ever-living shit out of the Iranians, and they basically have no defense industrial base left, and basically all of their warfighting capability is gone. But we've lost 2 really expensive, really hard to build radars, about half of our ATACMs and THAADs, and if you don't know what they are, they're really important and they're really expensive. Pentagon just asked Congress for $200 billion more dollars. Yep, that's right. We're expecting a president's budget request to drop next week at about $1.5 trillion. The SBIR program came back from the dead, but not yet. And Lucas program, low-cost UAS, the thing we've all been talking about since the war in Iran started, just got a lot more interesting. I'm Mike, and this is Last Week in D.C. Quick update on Operation Epic Fury. Obviously, a lot going on there. Not your normal conflict update. Hopefully, this is over sooner than later. It absolutely seems like the administration is moving in that direction. I commend them for that. From somebody who has fought our nation's wars for over 20 years, telling you that getting bogged down in a place that nobody knows how to spell is not a good idea. The reality of the war and why I have no mercy and no quarter for people who are dipping their toe in this is a quick means to a cheap buck is 13 U.S. citizens have been killed since Operation Epic Fury started. Hundreds, potentially dozens at least, more wounded. This is not a game, folks. That said, on the brighter side of life, about 70% of the Iranian missile capability is gone. Their ability to produce more missiles is basically zero, and the rest of their industrial base is also pretty much non-existent. Now, that said, this has been a stress test on our industrial base, basically in real time. Here's some numbers. The first 100 hours of combat cost us $1.7 billion. The next 6 days cost $11.3 billion. This is utilizing capabilities, munitions, and other novel technologies that were getting ready to come to the battlefield or position for deterrence against China that we never really budgeted for. In the first 16 days of the operation, over 6,000 mid to high-end munitions have been used. We've run through about 46% of our ATACMs, precision strike missiles, and 40% of our U.S.-operated THAAD interceptors. Those are anti-air missiles. There's a big issue here, and it's not about if we're going to be able to keep bombing the crap out of Iran. Obviously, that's the case. The concern is how much of this are we burning through to the benefit of China. Last time I checked, World War II wasn't started by the United States, but we sure as hell came out the winner. I don't want the winner of an Iran U.S. war, conflict, whatever, to beat China. Let's just be real. Everybody's getting involved, and we're hearing from many of our senior leaders. The Undersecretary of War for Acquisition and Sustainment, Mr. Michael Duffy, the Honorable, testified in front of Congress on March 4th about the defense industrial base, specifically munitions and what we are utilizing for Epic Fury. The Senate Armed Services Committee Chair, Senator Roger Wicker, held a hearing on March 24th specifically on low-cost munitions, Lucas and others that we'll talk about here, and the industrial base capacity. Who showed up to that is very interesting. There's going to be a lot of things we're going to cover today that you all should very much take notes on, because there's a lot of new terms, new titles, and people, the who's who in the zoo that you need to know going forward, or you're going to be looking for offices and people and titles and places that just don't even exist anymore. And as we know, the president pulled all of the big defense execs in and basically said, hey, you start quadrupling your capacity or I'm going to start making your life hell. That's the short story. Allegedly. Apparently, I need to say allegedly after everything. But we know it happened because he put it up on Truth Social. Anyways, so the situation we're in right now if you're in a small business or a startup, obviously you're not making a THAAD or an ATACMS. Obviously, nobody is making that ridiculous presumption. But what we know is the low-cost series of capabilities, low-cost UAS, low-cost counter UAS, low-cost cruise missile that have all been live for the last 2, 3, 6 months on a lot of these OTA marketplaces are really bearing fruit at this point, and you need to be in it to win it kind of thing. It's not necessarily the lottery, but if you're not in these marketplaces and you're not submitting to these OTAs, you're not going to get picked up for the parts of the defense industrial base that you actually can help support. So going back a little bit in time, a few years back, Mike Brown used to be DIU director. Lauren Selby, who used to be admiral, who used to be the chief of naval research, and Chairman Ken Calvert from the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, a.k.a. the dude that funds the defense budget, all put out a series of op-eds and papers called The Hedge Strategy. They talked about these high-end capabilities, F-47, the Columbia-class sub. They don't really deliver at any kind of low-rate or full-rate production deep into the 2030s. So how do we have a hedge strategy, a.k.a. buying cheap commercial explodey shit, in case something pops off between here and there that we can actually fight that war? Well, here you go. It's actually came to fruition. I'm not going to say any of them are Nostradamus, but if you got 2 eyeballs and you could figure out how long it takes to make an F-47 or a Sentinel missile when we still had that program before it got canceled because it was a disaster. All of these things give you an opportunity to get into these spaces in now this low-cost series. At the time, it wasn't called that, but if you go back and read these op-eds, it was pretty clear. Cheap, commercial, explodey shit is going to cover the gap until super expensive stuff gets here. Well, we're in a reality now where we're going to have a mixed bag. We're going to have the really high-end expensive shit that does things that are far more capable than the low-cost series of equipment, but we're going to need both. There's never a time where we're going to have enough of the high-end stuff, nor is there always going to be a justification to use the high-end stuff, as we've seen in the conflict in the Middle East over really since the war October 7th happened in Israel, when we've seen Iran launching Shahed missiles at Israel and causing all these things. We're using multi-$100,000, multi-million-dollar interceptors, missiles, effectors to hit tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. That cost comparison just doesn't work. We need a high-low mix, and this is where you come in. What does that look like? That looks like the Pentagon's asking for a $200 billion supplemental. There's still reconciliation money on the table. We're about to get a $1.5 trillion defense budget. And if you're in drones, counter UAS, low-cost interceptors, electronic warfare, or anything that has to do with supply chain or critical minerals, you need to be watching this money as it moves. You need to be on some kind of OTA, other transaction authority, or IDIQ, indefinite demand, indefinite quantity contract vehicle, so you can move fast when the money hits. If you're waiting around to bid on some kind of sole source contract that's just for you, you're missing the ball. That's not how they're doing business anymore. They're using OTAs, they're using IDIQs. They want to get people ready and prepped and in these big contract vehicles, as they're called, so that when the money hits and they need to move, they can move. You can't be waiting around for your own little special thing with your name on it. Those days are long gone. Specifically, in the reconciliation bill, there's over 25, the one that's on hand right now, there's over 25 billion for these types of categories. So now, the people that you need to know. 3 of the individuals that went up to go testify in front of the SASC are Admiral Akano, who is the MILDEP and running all of ASN RDA on the military side. So that's ASN RDA is the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. She's the MILDEP and running a lot of the new programs to include, things like Navy Rapid Capabilities Office and all the other innovation programs that they have. But separately, the Navy's rolled out a lot of their new PAEs over the last couple days. 2 of the people that got pulled up have the new first name, PA, program acquisition executive, specifically General Frank Lozano and General Robert Lyons. These are the Army dudes that are actually buying these weapons. These are the folks that if you're in this space at all, you need to be tracking to their offices. You need to know what their names are, PAE fires and PAE weapons. You need to know who their CPEs are and how you fit in that chain, because when this new budget hits, you might be in a different spot than you were last year. And there's going to be no excuses of like, oh, I didn't know. Like this, they've done more press on this than anybody could ever imagine. So there's not going to be any excuses that I didn't know where my program office went. Moving on to Lucas. Lucas just got really interesting. Not saying that it wasn't interesting before. It absolutely was. Lucas is an awesome program. We stole some Iranian tech, reverse engineered it. Now we're shooting it back at them, beating the ever-loving crap out of them. Big fan. But Lucas and all of its accolades, phenomenal. Amazing use case. Task Force Scorpion doing great things. Stealing Iranian technology, doing it at a price point that is realistic, affordable, sustainable. In the tens of thousands to fight things that are tens of thousands. Love that. On the other hand, Lucas is not only amazing for its cost effectiveness and mission application, but it was created by or produced by a small business. Big fan. First combat use was February 28th. That's when it got publicized. The Lucas bird you'd started to see little blips of it throughout the press coming out of the Undersecretary of War for Research and Engineering. There's a dog and pony show out in the courtyard of the Pentagon where Undersecretary Michael and Secretary of Defense and their team was running around looking at all this stuff. Lots of great pictures. And if you look at those pictures from back, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 6 months ago, there's an Iranian Shaheed sitting in the courtyard of the Pentagon. I digress. February 28th, it gets used in combat. Last week, Admiral Cooper, the CENTCOM commander, called Lucas an indispensable capability. Proven in combat operations from a small business, really in an unsophisticated, no disrespect to the dudes making it, but it's done on purpose. It's not a sophisticated piece of kit. It doesn't have these crazy, systems and comms and avionics that make them really hard to build, make, and manufacture. Well, I don't know who out there is connecting the dots, but Lucas, amazing program out of a company, SpecterWorks small business. How did SpecterWorks get there? My other favorite program, AppFit, the program to accelerate the procurement and fielding of innovative technologies, aka the Valley Death Fund, aka you can get $10 to $50 million to grow and scale your business, get out of RDT&E money, and move into a real program of record and become a big boy company. Well, Lucas came from there, but I don't know if everybody else is tracking this. Lucas is the name of the aircraft that SpecterWorks won it for. The guts and the components are made up of 7 other AppFit programs. Now, we can't talk about them all, but some we can. Some have already been made public. So we have SpecterWorks, obviously. We got a company called MMS, Modular Mobile Systems. We got a company called TSC, Technology Services Corporation. You got Darkhive and Anello Photonics. There's a couple others that are classified, but AppFit makes up the entirety of the whole Lucas system. So when you look at a program like AppFit and an aircraft and a delivery tactically of Lucas being cheaper and better than the thing that we're fighting our adversary with, and it came out of not one, but potentially up to 8 different small businesses enabled by AppFit. Down the line, every single thing that we have been talking about in the last year and a half, almost 2 years, We need to buy cheap explodey shit. We need programs to move faster. We need to do it in procurement dollars, not RDT&E. We need to use small businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, they have all been proven true. You can no longer say that there is not a place in the world for small businesses and startups to get into the space that has been occupied for generations by a couple of really big, really old companies. AppFit has enabled the entirety of the Lucas program to rain hellfire down on the Iranians, combat proven, and should be the model going forward. Maybe you can't make it all by yourself, but you start stacking capabilities selected through the one of, if not the Department of War's most highly selected program. You can deliver some real capabilities in some real urgent timelines and do it without bankrupting the company. Lucas, win. Stealing shit from the Iranians, win. Small business, win. AppFit, win. I mean, doesn't get any better than that. So what do you do about it? If you have something that can win an AppFit, and now that we have software, it's basically everything, you need to compete. But as we had the 2-3 weeks ago now, we have Mr. Devin Bohannon here, the program manager from AppFit. He was so generous with his time to come here and talk to members and friends of the family over here at Frontier House. The warfighter input and the warfighter effect and the impact on the small business are major decision criteria. If you have users downrange that are asking for your thing, that's going to weigh very heavily in the selection process. You can look across all of the technologies that won the AppFit that ended up contributing to the Lucas program. Model your package off of that. Talk about warfighter need. Talk about how it's going to impact your company. Yes, there is absolutely a requirement for you to have a PAE or a PEO or some kind of acquisition shop to carry it on the back end. But first and foremost, you need to be answering that warfighter impact. Don't come with some boring back office shit that should be paid for through a different account. What are you delivering for the warfighter should be page 1, 2, and 3 of anything you're writing for AppFit, and Lucas proves that. All right. The AI wars are very real inside the Pentagon, aka Anthropic versus Pentagon. So March 26th this year, a judge blocked the Trump administration from being able to ban federal agencies from using Anthropic. The DoD wanted universal access for Claude to use it for any purposes, to include autonomous weapons. Anthropic said no, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to do mass surveillance. The DoD basically said, you're a supply chain risk. This is a designation historically reserved for foreign adversaries. Basically, the Pentagon designated Anthropic in the same way that they would one of their adversaries. Probably not the best move. But anyways, what this does is it's opening up a bigger conversation about AI in the Department of War. The Department of War, very explicitly, I don't think Secretary Hegseth is unclear about this, is that the Department of War's job is to kill our nation's adversaries and deter other people from fucking around and finding out. We're very clear on our policy here, which means that if you're going to work with the Department of War, you don't get to come in and say, we don't want to do those things. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, like, if you don't want to do those things, find a different customer. Just because the preponderance of the discretionary spending in the U.S. is in the Department of War doesn't mean you get to be here if you don't want to conduct the mission of the department. So Secretary Hegseth put out an AI acceleration memo for the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment to incorporate any lawful use language into all AI purchases going forward in 180 days. NDAA Section 1513 from last year also said the DoD must develop a CMMC requirement for AI and ML systems. So you have two significant policy changes coming down the pike if you work in AI. One, you are going to be mandated to B, you are going to be mandated for use in all lawful cases. And there's going to be some type of AIML security framework that is coming down the pipe pretty shortly. So I bring this up all the time. You don't get to be a tourist in defense tech, war tech, national security. You don't get to just show up and be like, oh, I'm tired of making money on dating apps. Maybe I'll try my hand at, defense tech. That doesn't square. Sorry. You have to be committed to the mission. You have to understand what's going on. This is a very necessary policy change at the department that we're going to use your stuff to kill bad guys, and you need to be okay with that or find another customer. Be aware and alert of this. I'm not saying that I'm definitely not somebody that says all companies have to have morals, ethics, and values. You shouldn't be a piece of shit, and you should treat your employees well, and you should be a legal organization. But I'm not saying that like every company needs to have some like virtuous mission, but you should really talk to your investors and your advisors and your employees if you're in the AI space and if you're a leader in an AI company. You better start having some town halls and some round tables, and that conversation is going to break one of two ways. Hey, everybody, I don't know where you're all from necessarily. I mean, I'm sure the CEO does. I hope they do. But people come from different backgrounds and different upbringings in different places in the country. A lot of our software is made in places that aren't necessarily maybe okay with killing people in the Department of War, and maybe they were able to maybe put that aside and pretend that they weren't doing that for a little while. But it's your responsibility now as a leader in a company to sit everybody down, have your little town hall meetings and go, hey, our technology is going to kill bad guys, or we're not going to be able to sell to the Department of War. This is Maven all over again if you don't get ahead of it. This is the mandate. This is going forward. You can agree with it or not. But the fact of the matter is this is now the policy of the department, and you got to get on board or get out. Coming out of the White House, we are eagerly awaiting the fiscal year 27 president's budget request to Congress. As the president has been very clear to signal, he's looking at something to the effect of 1.5 trillion. We're going to get into what that number actually means, but the Pentagon comptroller, gentleman who I am proud to call a friend and a colleague, Mr. Jules Hurst, said at a defense conference last week, it's going to procure more aircraft during the FYDP, the Future Years Defense Plan, the next 5 years, more ships and tens of thousands of critical munitions. You're going to see a heavy industrial-based focus on this, on ships, aircrafts, and bombs. Obviously, that is on par with everything that we've seen from the Forge Act, really focusing on ships and ship infrastructure, everything that we're talking about right now in the Middle East with munitions, how fast we're burning them, how fast we need to get them on board. And then obviously our planes, if you look across the inventory, we have differing degrees of recapitalization programs, modernization programs. We still need to get the F-47 up and running. Lots of stuff going on in the aircraft world. Probably more a blinking red light, though, in munitions first, and then ships probably second. And I say second just because it's a longer-term issue to try to fix. I think we get the munitions issues right a lot faster than we're going to fix, decades of dilapidated ship infrastructure. So we'll see. But Jules is a good man. He knows what he's doing, and he's starting to set the record straight of what you think you're going to get. Back in the day, we used to have this game we played, this budgetary game called Base and OCO. So you had your base budget, which is your normal president's budget request, and then OCO, overseas contingency operations. We were like, yeah, this is what we need normally, but we're also fighting this global war on terror, so we're going to need all this extra money. I feel like there's some version of this that will be split between base and maybe another reconciliation, base and another supplemental, or in a very similar way that they do with, say, some other parts of the budget, you might get a base bill and then you might get a one-time aircraft, ships, and munitions like annex, an addition, an appendix, if you will, of like, here's all the normal stuff that we want, and then we just need extra this one time. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. That's before we start counting what the hell is going on with Golden Dome, because the price tag on that is going to be legit in the trillions, no question. I've seen some budget estimates that said Golden Dome is going to do like 500 billion. No, trillions, no questions asked. These are not only some of the most expensive capabilities that we produce, period, but you're talking about moving into space infrastructure and defensive capabilities in the way that we've never really had to conceptualize. And if you go and look back at Army Futures Command, RCTO, the Rapid Capabilities something technology office, like they've been trying to do like high-powered laser interceptors for missiles at like 300 watts. These things take like an 18-wheeler full of power source to knock out ammunition, and they haven't gotten off the ground yet. These are very, very advanced capabilities that we're going down the rabbit hole on, and it's going to be expensive. So like that's even before that. Like you could have a whole other annex for Golden Dome and it could be just as much as the whole defense budget, and I still don't think it would take care of it. But nonetheless, it's absolutely something we should do. As we talked about last week, the Director of National Intelligence put out their annual threat assessment, and missile threats to the U.S. are about to skyrocket between now and 2030. A $1.5 trillion defense bill. Okay. So again, one of my goals here is to educate people, aka just help people stop saying stupid shit. The defense bill means a lot of different things when you say it incorrectly. What the defense bill to me means, because I'm a pragmatic and common sense person, means the enacted bill of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense, the actual budget that goes to the Department of War, plus the element of it that comes over from military construction and veterans Subcommittee on Appropriations. Add the MilCon piece to the Hack-D piece, and you have the defense budget. Carve that up in a lot of other ways, but none of that actually matters if you ask me, because I care about real money. What a $1.5 trillion defense bill, if we're talking about that in terms of Hack-D and MilCon VA, would be a 67% increase over last year's bill, which, no surprise, was the largest defense appropriations bill ever before that. When the PBR, the President's Budget Request for 27, comes out, the 27 PBR, look for drones, attritable systems, Golden Dome, interceptors, munitions, space domain awareness, going to be huge for Golden Dome, AI, autonomous systems, and get in front of it before it starts actually going into action. Because if we see a President's Budget Request, PBR, next week, we know that the appropriations committees are doing their thing right now. We'll probably see an appropriations subcommittee mark probably mid to late May, I would guess. Definitely before mid-June. I think they did last year's on June 15th. So we're looking mid-May to latest mid-June to get that first chop on the president's budget. Now, every day that the president's budget continues to be delayed, there is a justification for the appropriations process to slow down as well. But your first and best signals for the entire year are going to be in that president's budget request, because that's what the administration is saying to Congress that I want. Your homework, as soon as this comes out, read it. Read it for yourself. Learn how to read the defense budget. You go to the comptroller's website, DOD Comptroller, DOW Comptroller, and you go in, do the fiscal year 27 budget materials, and then it's going to say DOD, DOW, defense-wide, fourth estate, That's all the stuff that lives at that level. That's where USW-R&E and USW-A&S live. That's actually where SOCOM lives. And then you have your service budgets, Army, Navy, and Air Force. Marine Corps lives under Navy. Space Force lives under Air Force. And then you go in there, and then you start tinkering around in there, and you go procurement, RDT&E, so on and so forth. Read the budget yourself. Don't wait for somebody to put it out on a blog or you call your consultant or whatever. Like, learn how to read the budget. I mean, this is like basic ass shit. There's going to be a lot that changes in this bill for sure. There's going to be new funding lines. There's going to be new programs. Hopefully they had enough time to align everything to the new PAE structure so that everything that they're doing is actually aligned to the person where it's going. That's one of the things, it's just administrative bullshit. It seems like it, but it's not. When you restructure an entire Navy PAE RAS and you're going to take all of the autonomous robotic systems and the AI that goes along with them and put them under one house, if in the budget it still shows that they're under their old offices, it just gets a little bit more complicated to understand what they're funding with what. Hopefully they had time to do that. We will see. So, inbound supplemental. Let's talk about supplementals for a second. We've done a lot of them recently. If you're not familiar with the supplemental and you want to understand a little bit more, obviously CRS puts out a lot of great papers on all things budget and Congress, Congressional Research Service. It's free. It's nonpartisan. It's put out by the U.S. Congress. It's a government resource. CRS reports are phenomenal. They're basic. They're dry and, as they should be. There's no commentary or editorial in them. They're just good papers. They put out a lot of stuff on supplementals, but if you really want to see what's in the supplemental, go back to the last 2, 3, 4 Ukrainian supplementals that we've done. These are not big squishy pots of money, right? This isn't necessarily, when you're dealing with the Department of War. If you've seen the State Department supplementals, they are big, giant, squishy pots of money, which is why they've basically been defunded. But in the Department of War, they're really precise line-by-line entries. It is this many new F-35s, this many ATACMs, this many HIMARS. You can go back and you can see that it's very precise in the way that they allocate the resources for a supplemental because it's under a lot of scrutiny because you're asking for an appropriation outside a cycle. That said, there will probably be wider areas in a supplemental that look a lot more like what we saw in reconciliation, where you might just see a blanket $1 billion for low-cost UAS. We'll see. These are always tricky processes to navigate in DC because they're always fraught with political gamesmanship. Because if we're saying that we need a supplemental, there's something going on that we need to supplement the previous year's appropriations with because there's basically an emergency going on. But people like to use that to their advantage. Never let a good crisis go to waste. So watch what's in there. Watch where your opportunities are. Be on the OTAs. Be on the IDIQs because that's where the money's going to flow. Because if they need to move money quickly, and that amount of money, $200 billion, is actually not easy to spend if you're trying to break it out to little, $10 million, $100 million contracts. You got to be on these big IDIQs. Shield IDIQ out of Missile Defense Agency for Golden Dome is a great example. There's 1,000 vendors on that contract, and it's got a contract ceiling of $150 billion. I'm not going to say they're going to put all $200 billion on a single contract vehicle, but you're sure as hell not going to see $10 million, $100 million solicitations when it comes to things that have to do with the supplemental. They're just going to need to get the money out faster, and that's what it is. The supplemental is equal to the annual appropriations process in the sense that it goes through the appropriations committees and through the standard but off-cycle appropriations process, unlike reconciliation, which is in mandatory spending and is governed by the armed services committees. So I say all that to say, understand who is shaping and influencing that bill. If you see a Senator Wicker talking about low-cost munitions, that's great. Senator Wicker is a an amazing advocate for the things that the warfighters need without a doubt. But if you're looking for signals of what ends up in the appropriations bill, you should be looking at Senator Collins. You should be looking at Senator McConnell. You should be looking at Senator Patty Murray out of Washington. You should be looking at Senator Coons, Chairman Calvert, Ranking Member McCollum in the House, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLaura in the House. You should be looking at the chairs of the full appropriations committee and then the subcommittee chairs and rankings for the defense subcommittee to understand what they've said in public and where they're going to drive a potential supplemental. So that's how you do it. They're going to tell you what they're going to do. I promise you. If nothing else, members of Congress are geared towards speaking in public and telling you things. You just have to know what to listen for. It's not that hard, especially when it comes to some of the more vocal people that are out there all the time. They have press releases on their website and they'll tell you what they said. Those are your signals of who's in support of the thing that you're doing. It's great that Senator Wicker wants low-cost UAS. It just so happens that it's also great that Chairman Calvert and the hedge strategy that built DIU 3.0 and got them their first $1 billion is also the one that's going to be driving much of the supplemental conversation. Congress 101, baby. It's easier than it looks. All right. Executive orders. Executive orders coming out of the top. Preserving America's Game. Why they named it that? I'll be honest, I actually don't know. But it is what it is. It was published through the Federal Register on March 25th. Now, here's a word that everybody needs to understand and you need to learn and put into your lexicon if you're going to do business in the federal government. The Federal Register. We've talked about this before. On average, the United States Congress will pass about 200 laws a year. Oh, I'm sorry, a cycle or a session of Congress. It's a 2-year period. Every 2 years, Congress passes about 200 actual laws. About half of them are naming parks, forests, mountaintops, and federal buildings after people who have died or famous people. Others are laws to mint coins and other erroneous behavior. And then the remainder are actual bills of some substance, 12 being the annual appropriations bills, because if they don't do that, the government shuts down. So Congress actually doesn't pass a lot of legislation in a session, which is a good thing. Not to be confused with the amount of legislation that's introduced, which is about 20,000 pieces of legislation which are introduced in a session of Congress. Most of them are just so members of Congress can say, look at me, I'm doing something. They're called messaging bills. It's a real thing. The Federal Register, on the other hand, is the executive branch regulatory machine that takes the laws that are passed and then tell the executive branch agencies and you as the American public how these things are going to be put into action. You should be reading the Federal Register, especially if there's something going on that interests you. Like, oh, I don't know, selling things to the government. So, Preserving America's Game, published in the Federal Register March 25th. It's the implementation of Executive Order 14396. So, it reinforces Buy America for critical electronics. Okay, we've seen this in drone dominance as well. They're telling people you got to get off the Chinese crack pipe. I got it that all this Temu shit and all these DJIs, they're cheap as shit and that's good for your bottom dollar, but they're all compromised. You can't run a Department of War that supply chain is dependent on our adversary. I think that's pretty common sense at this point. Additionally, it applies to technology transfers, supply chain certifications, and other designations that fall under basically getting us out of the Chinese supply chain. It's going to apply to everything that comes in the budget, everything that comes in supplementals. It's already in drone dominance, and it is active now. So if you're in the space, you need to be thinking through domestic electronics, alternative components, supply chain, transparency, your compliance on these things, because this isn't subtle. This isn't a hint. This is maybe you should. This has a 3-year phased implementation that you will be banned from doing business with the federal government if you can't get your papers right. You can't get your tech right. You keep using adversarial Chinese technology. It has changed the concept of being safe, secure, diversified in your supply chain into a competitive advantage. Because if you know that somebody else out there in your space that you're competing against can't get there, you're going to have the edge. And thinking through that, I don't know if preemptively anybody was eliminated from drone dominance round one because of supply chain, but given the strength and seriousness of this administration and how they're doing that, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the weight of the selection for the last drone dominance round actually had something to do with that. I don't know that for sure, but it sure as hell is an explicit requirement going into the next round. So, okay. And my favorite topic that won't die, SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research Program. It was dead for 6 months because it became fraud, waste, and abuse. Then everybody negotiated the hell out of it, and finally it came back. It was voted unanimously by the Senate. It's a Senate mechanism when people don't want to have to take a vote on something. Sometimes because it truly is a unanimous consent. Other times it's nobody wants to be the lone asshole that says no and gums up the whole system. So they let it ride. Very famously, Senator Rand Paul, who was chair of the Small Business Committee through the last reauthorization, that was not a big fan of the program. But anyways, it passed. Senate 3971 passed on unanimous consent on March 3rd. Today's March 27th. It passed the House 345 to 41 under suspension of the rules. That's the House version of we don't want to vote. So we're going to pass it on the suspension of the rules. It's going to be a clean, easy vote. And it passed. So keep this in mind. Congress is made up outside of, barring any delegates and non-voting members. Congress has 535 members of Congress. That means 435 of them are sitting in the U.S. House of Representatives. 345 is a lot of votes to get in the House. Like, this is truly like, when people are like, oh, well, Congress says, if you're at like a 218, 219 vote margin, that means that's a party line vote. And one side of Congress says something, and because the House of Representatives is a true democracy, it is a one vote democracy. If one person tips those scales, it's majority rules. It's gang warfare, right? 345 votes is really good. You had 241 no votes. That's legit. So once that happens, what happens? So both chambers vote on it. Why is SBIR not a thing? Well, so I would like to give credit to a gentleman that I was speaking with yesterday. Names of the innocent will be protected for their own good. But I am always happy to have a conversation, be corrected and be wrong and or be educated. I would say there's probably some version of all of that. So I had made a statement that we were in a pocket veto situation. We'll talk about what that is. And he said, no. It's a presentation position or a presentation issue. I was like, no, I don't think it is. I think it's a pocket veto issue. We went back and forth a little bit. He was right. So let's get into this. A little bit of congressional 101 here. So under Article 1, Section 7, once a bill is formally presented to the president has 10 days to sign it into law, veto it, or do nothing, which then, let me go back real quick. So Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution. So Article 1 being Congress, right? Article 1 is Congress. Article 1, Section 7 says once a bill is formally presented to the president, they have 10 days, excluding Sundays, to sign it, veto it, or let it become law without signature. So there's a fourth case. So if the president does nothing and Congress is in session, it automatically becomes a law after 10 days. If the president does nothing and Congress is adjourned, it's called a pocket veto and the bill dies. No return message, no opportunity to override. The reason that it automatically becomes law if Congress is in session is because if they don't, The Congress is still here to deal with it. If they're out of session and nothing happens, no one can do anything about it, and it dies. Look, Constitution was written a long time ago. This probably came from a good reason. We still have it. It is what it is. It is a mechanism that can be used in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. I am not a fan of every time somebody has a gripe or a grievance with the Constitution, we tear it up, light it on fire, and start over. But it has become probably used for something other than what it was intended for, and that's just the way of the world, right? So the House passed the SBIR legislation on March 17th. Here's another new word for you. Presentment. Presenting a passed piece of legislation to the president usually takes 2 to 5 days. Official presentment to the president should have happened March 20th-ish. The Senate goes into recess on March 27th. That is today, ladies and gentlemen. So this is where our conversation from last night went. I said there's some reason that President Trump wants to pocket veto the SBIR legislation. I don't know why. I am not living inside his head, and I would not even consider trying to analyze or assess what they could be thinking. Gentlemen kindly informed me that presentment had not yet occurred. So when we talk about things in Washington, D.C., you have to consider everything through 3 lenses: policy, politics, and procedure. Policy. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to do that thing? It's policy. Politics are what side of the aisle thinks it's a good thing or a bad thing. How do you spin that if you believe it's a good thing or a bad thing? And that goes all the way down to political individual engagements, hurt feelings, who likes who and who doesn't. That's the politics of DC. And then we have the procedure. The procedure of DC could be just as deadly to a bill as the policy or the politics. Here's the kicker. There is no constitutional requirement on when Congress must formally present the bill to the president. Congressional leadership controls the presentment clock. So if the leadership delays, when we say leadership, let's be very clear who we're talking about. We're talking about Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Senator Thune. They are the congressional leadership. If leadership delays presentment until some time of which recess begins, or that 10 days will land in a period where they will not be in session, and that clock starts ticking, SBIR could die. If they do it in a window where Congress will be in session, even if the president does nothing because he doesn't want to sign it into law, for whatever reason, I'm purely speculating at this point, it would just get passed into law without his signature, and boom, Bob's your uncle. So what we know is SBIR has a lot of support. Essentially, 445 out of 500, sorry, say that again. SBIR reauthorization has a lot of support. To be specific, 445 out of 535 votes. You have 435 yeses in the House, and you have 100 yeses in the Senate. Out of the people who are missing and vacant seats, you only had 41 people out of 535 that have said no. The Iranian war is burning through the industrial base like a boss, and a lot of technologies like Lucas or other capabilities of a lot of the bigger, more mature startups, think Shield AI, think Anduril, they have all won SBIRs at some point. There is a large majority of the U.S. Congress that wants to see this reauthorized, and it's in the cases where it's proven its worth in spades. So why didn't the president sign it the moment that it was passed, and why didn't Speaker Johnson or Majority Leader Thune run it over to the White House that day? I have no idea. I can only speculate that with a supplemental on the horizon, talk of another reconciliation, the Save America Act, the Department of Homeland Security still not being funded. This is either being delayed because it doesn't rise to the level of importance, which sad for some is, given that list of things, absolutely true. Or two, because there is so much support, it's being used as a bargaining chip to get another one of those things across the finish line. Because when Congress shows its hand and everyone wants it, the president can absolutely use that as leverage if there's something more contentious to get across the finish line. What we know is the SBIR bill reauthorization that has been passed through both chambers of Congress is good. Not as good as I would have liked, but Congress is a deliberative body and you need to make concessions to both sides of the aisle. If your bill doesn't make anyone happy, it's a good bill. Don't submit your proposals yet. There are no active proposals. It is still not a real thing. As of today, March 27th, 2026, it is still not a real thing. It is passed Congress. Yes, it has not been signed into law. Don't submit anything yet, but be prepared, and mostly be prepared if you fall into the category where you can make a claim on the strategic breakthroughs, because that's really going to be your accelerant if you want to take a previously completed SBIR project and get it into theater to help our warfighters in CENTCOM right now. Have that package ready. Build it just like an AppFit package. Show value and capability and impact on the warfighter. And I don't know how much SBIR money is left for fiscal year 26, but go get you some of that if you can deliver something to CENTCOM like time now. New buyer alert. Okay. If you sell something that in some way, shape, or form would be considered IT, software, enterprise systems, you have a new buyer that you probably have not thought about before. And if you have thought about it, you've maybe tried one or two attempts to work with these folks and it was awful and terrible and you said never again. I am talking about the Defense Innovation Systems Agency, aka DISA. DISA is the single largest IT buyer in the US government. DISA is implementing accelerators across all of their task orders and deliverables. And their March 26 deadline says 40% of all task orders and deliverables must use an accelerator. By September of 26, it's going to be 80%. So that means they are going to start moving through a process that is going to make it a lot easier. And spoiler alert, head exploding emoji, more like commercial IT sales in the private sector. How about them apples? Why is the easiest thing to sell in the commercial world one of the hardest things to sell in the department? I don't know, but they fixed it. Accelerators are now going to be... Don't think of an accelerator as like a tech accelerator where you're going to go like to a place and get taught a thing and like help, matchmake or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their accelerators are accelerating getting task orders and proposals and purchase orders done in an expedient way through oral proposals. Accelerators for DISA are going to be oral proposals, presentations, confidence ratings, and quick consensus at presentation of whether they should buy these things or not. The DISA procurement executive, a gentleman named Doug Packard, said oral proposals or presentations, confidence ratings, and it's about us reaching consensus as soon as the presentation is provided instead of waiting weeks or months. You're going to know as soon as they can tell you that they want your technology. Okay. This is going to change how DISA does business and create them or create a new customer for you that you once never thought you would have had. In the past, DISA took these lengthy, far-based contract proposals that would cost you tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in either staff hours to write them internally or some consultant that, specializes in these kind of crazy things. Big companies could always bid on these things. Think of your big IT primes. Small businesses, startups would never, ever think about going this direction because it was such an awful process. Now, if you're a good communicator, you're a good presenter, you can do a short proposal and it makes sense and you can show your value, you actually have a chance of winning in DISA. Now, there isn't a lot of documentation out there yet. They're going to start rolling out their implementation guides. I will tell you the secret sauce of where you need to go if you want to work with DISA. Go to Navy PEO Digital. On Navy PEO Digital, created by Justin Finelli, who is a gentleman, a scholar, and a great friend of mine doing great things in the Navy, was dual hatting as PEO Digital and the Navy CTO. He defined what he calls world-class alignment metrics. How the Navy buys digital products. Are they cheaper? Better? Do the customers like them? So on and so forth. There are 5 of them. Use the Navy PEO Digital world-class alignment metrics and all of the amazing documents that they've put out to tell you how to demonstrate your value to the government. Package that shit up. Control A, Control F, delete Navy, add in DISA, write your proposal, and as you start giving your presentations, hit those world-class alignment metrics because there is no better way to justify your software or your IT systems to the government than what Justin has set up. Period, full stop. All right, just because I like poking the bear, let's go over some contracts that cleared this week. I don't know if you all know this, but you can sign up on departmentofwar.mil, I think like /contracts or something. And they will email you every week all the contracts that came out. So if you are feeling yourself becoming lazy or lackadaisical, or you just got a big funding round and you're like, nah, I'm good. Look at all this VC money I have. Let me remind you what you're actually up against. Raytheon just got a $192 million contract for the ANTPY-2 radar. That's not a raise. That's not speculative venture capital money. That is a $192 million sole source contract. Boeing just got a $326 million contract for the Chinooks. Austal just got a $126 million contract for shipbuilding. General Dynamics Electric Boat just got a $95 million contract for submarines. AeroVironment, yes, love the folks at AeroVironment. They're not a startup, ladies and gentlemen. They've been around since the 1970s, and they know what the fuck they're doing. AeroVironment just got a $117 million contract for long-range reconnaissance UAS. Yeah. So, everybody that's been on the SRR hunt, long-range reconnaissance is going to AeroVironment. This is what you're up against, ladies and gentlemen. It's not about outraising your competitor startup. It's about realizing that the folks that have been around here for a while and they still hold all the cards, they're getting hundreds of millions of contract on the reg. And you're trying to outraise your competition while they're doing that in a single contract. Ouch. All right, back on the nerd shit. Compliance. FAR overhaul. We're in the midst of the revolutionary FAR overhaul. Revolutionary in some senses, maybe not in some others. That I will leave that to the FAR ninjas and the FAR gods to argue over. What I do know is there are some very interesting updates in how contracts are being written. Specifically, 23 civilian agencies and others in the Department of War have started issuing FAR Part 8 deviations and FAR Part 16 updates. What in the hell does that mean? Okay, so let's just start here. If this is new for you, I'm sorry. The FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That's how the U.S. government buys things. It is an extensive document that says all kinds of crazy shit in it. And basically, it's the reason that we buy things slow. That said, there have been updates. These ones are good. That's why I'm bringing them up. FAR Part 8. As I talk to a lot of small businesses, startups, founders, investors, I see things a lot of times that are things. that are widgets, like small things, small widgets, even services to a certain extent. And my first question is, are you on the GSA schedule? And their response is, what is that? If you think of the GSA schedule, this is really the Amazon for the federal government. And it's not new. It's been around for a very long time. You get on the GSA schedule by getting a number. It's called an NSN, a national stock number. And anyone can buy your thing with the money that they have whenever they want. You don't need a separate contract to buy things off the GSA schedule. Whoa. So if you make a widget that could go on there, it's actually a really great way to be able to almost do commercial style sales. You can leverage a lot of different pots of money to do it. And the contracting is actually taken up by the GSA. Fun fact, the GSA covers a significant amount of the Department of War's contracting. It's called assisted acquisition. And like 20 or 30% of the Department of War's contracting actually goes through the GSA already. So this is not new territory. If your thing can go on the GSA schedule, it should be. And then you can just go to a customer. And when you meet Sergeant Mike out in the field, he's like, oh my God, I really like that thing. You just give them the NSN number and say, we're on the GSA schedule. You can buy it. This is how much it costs. The price is transparent. It's on there. If you make something that is commoditized in that sense and you're not on the GSA schedule, you should be. So there's that. Sorry, so itchy. So what did they do to far part A the GSA schedule that we are now talking about this? Well, contracting officers have a list or a process. Think of it like a Candyland or a Monopoly board. They have to go through block by block by block, and sometimes they get to skip a few spaces, and sometimes they have to go back, and it's a thing. This list used to be really long, and this game used to be really complicated because they had to say, well, can this person do it? Well, if this person can't do it, can this person do it? Well, if this person can do it, can they do it with this person? And if they can't do it with this person, is there a way that and it was driving the contracting and acquisition process in a way that actually stopped the delivering of capabilities because of different nuanced rules and different set-asides, and this person has to be considered before. It's stupid. They collapsed that list. It's much more streamlined. They got rid of all the duplicative processes. Market research is now a 2-page metric decision. And realistically, for items under $10 million, RFIs and solicitations may go away if they can get all of this stuff onto the GSA schedule, continue to streamline the process, get rid of redundant and duplicative steps, and basically turn that into market research. If you make something that can go on the GSA schedule under $10 million, you need to be figuring out how to get on there, because that's the way you transition a user in the field from we need this to how you buy it. And that doesn't require a contracting officer or a contract or an OTA or anything. That is literally, here is my NSN number, go buy my thing. Doesn't get any easier than that. Doesn't work for everything, doesn't work for everybody. But if you think in any way, shape, or form you might be able to get on the GSA schedule, go figure it out. All right, the other nerdy FAR update. FAR Part 16. FAR Part 16 is the part of the FAR that talks about contract type. Firm fixed price, cost plus, time and materials, so on and so forth. The old version was very prescriptive in the way that you needed to buy a certain thing with a certain contract type, and it had lots of documentation. And it honestly did not help small businesses or startups in any way, shape, or form, because it biased towards big businesses whose model was bid to win, manage to profit. So what does that mean? It means if a large company that makes revenue in other things can underbid the price of the thing at the proposal level, it can be cheaper because they can float the cost of the actual item, and they make it all back up in management services, O&M, the butts in seats, and all the tail stuff. A small business or a startup can't take the hit on the front end on the item, and a lot of times they lose. So now, instead of all these contract types defaulting to lowest price technically acceptable in firm fixed price contracts, now you can be more holistically assessed under a values-based structure where, again, when you're bringing impact to the warfighter, speed of delivery, maybe you're not the cheapest, but you're modular, you're open, you can plug in and integrate with other technologies. You give the source selection board more tools to pick you on overall value rather than lowest price technically acceptable. So that being said, if you have government contracts, review them, see what you've won, how you bid. If you don't understand the different contract types, you can go on DAU's website. You can literally just go to Google DAU contracting cone, and you're gonna get this funny diagram, and it looks like a fan, and it's got all your contracting types in there. Understand the different FAR-based contracting types and understand which one works for your business the best. Then write to those in a way that you're putting value up front that allows a source selection under these new FAR Part 16 rules to use a different contract type or get to yes in a different way because you are actually providing the best value to the government, the U.S. taxpayer, and the warfighter rather than just being the cheapest. Because as we know, just being the cheapest is not what the warfighter needs, wants, or gives us an edge over China. We want what's best. You need to be able to articulate that a little bit better, and now the rules are in place to allow you to do that. Not too shabby. All right, let's wrap this up here. Transition to next week in D.C. Bum, bum, bum. Next week in D.C., upcoming solicitations that we have going on. The JIATA 401 CSO is still open. It's going to be open until 2028. I will keep reminding everybody about that CSO until people stop not knowing about it. If you make something in counter UAS, you have to be on that. Period. Next. Army UAS Marketplace. It's open for infinity until they close it. If you make something in UAS, you have to bid to this CSO. It's open. Send them an unsolicited white paper. Same thing with the JIATA 401 CSO. Just send them a white paper. The details are on there. Everything's on sam.gov. You fill it out. You send it to them. You say, this is what I do. It's an open market research period. Are you sending it into the dark? Yes, absolutely. But if you can quickly, clearly articulate what you do and the value, you shouldn't need a 50-page white paper. You should be able to do it in a reasonable amount of time and then use that over and over again for many of your unsolicited white papers or BAA proposals or CSO proposals. All right. Real stuff that's open. DHS, Department of Homeland Security. We are not biased here to a particular federal agency. If somebody's working in national security and somebody's looking to work with small businesses and startups, I'm in for it. Department of Homeland Security just opened up a counter UAS IDIQ. It has a $1.5 billion ceiling, ladies and gentlemen. That is not too shabby. Most of the OTs that we're seeing coming out of USDRD and some of these other places are capped at $100 million. This is a $1.5 billion ceiling OTA. It's Department of Homeland Security. It's a multiple award IDIQ. Obviously, you're not going to get all of it. The scope of this contract is going to cover Customs and Border Protection, Secret Service, FAA, World Cup 2026, and then more broadly, Homeland Defense. We've seen a big swing to this. We've seen this in the Department of War. We've seen this in the Department of Homeland Security. This is on sam.gov. They discuss their on-ramp process. And as you can see, not only the Homeland Defense and the Director of National Intelligence Annual Threat Assessment, but World Cup 2026 is coming up here pretty quick. A lot of money is going to be moving to that. That's a near-term requirement that if you can fill with some kind of counter UAS capability, obviously that can be deployed in the United States of America. Don't be coming up talking about kinetic interceptors. But if you've got something else that helps in the counter UAS spectrum that can be deployed domestically, this is your opportunity. Additionally, a super cool, super small, most people haven't heard of this office, is 16th Air Force. They just opened up a CSO. 16th Air Force is the Air Force unit that deals with cyber and information warfare. This is urgent capability. They are closing this one on March 30th. By the time you watch this, if you're not subscribed and you don't see this when it comes out tonight, tick tock, this closes on Monday. And it just opened up, and it is moving quick. There is something that they need, that they want, and you can provide it if you watch this show and you hear about it. Or if you're just trolling stam.gov, which you should also be doing. And then moving on to events and why in the world anybody would ever come to D.C. If you do come to the Frontier House, we are happy to have you here. It's your home away from home, and FOB D.C. for when you come here. You are surrounded by a community of interest where everybody loves national security and they want to make friends and fellowship to do things together as a community. It's phenomenal. All right, we're going to go over a couple upcoming events and why you would and could and should come to Washington, D.C. When you do, come to the Frontier House. You'll be surrounded by an ecosystem of people who care about the same things you do and want friends and fellowship in like-minded human beings to kick it while they're in Washington, D.C. because it sucks here. All right, what do we have coming up? Over the next 30 days, we have the Unmanned Autonomous Systems Symposium. That's going to be April 8th and 9th. We have Modern Day Marine coming up. Not nearly as crazy or bougie as AUSA, but it's the Marines, so it's way better. Modern Day Marine is going to be at the Walter Washington Convention Center. That's April 28th through 30th. That's a big deal. If you've never been to one of these things, I'm not saying you probably need to cough up the 10, 20 grand, whatever it is, to have a booth there, but you should definitely just go. Like, there are PMs and PEOs and PAEs just wandering all over the place. Like, look, don't think you're going to hijack them and pull them off to the side and get a meeting and get a contract, but they're on stage. You should be talking to them. I am not a fan of these big think tanky policy things unless that's what you're into. If you're an academic or you're in policy and you want to talk about what we should do in Kazakhstan over the next 30 years, go for it. But if you're listening to this, chances are you're in a small business or a startup and you're like, how do I do business and how do I get money? Well, the answer is you listen to the people who have the money. You listen to the PMs, the PEOs, the PAs, the people in the 8s, J8s, the requirement shop, the N9s. They'll tell you where they're going and what they're going to buy. Those people are the folks that hang out at these kinds of events. You should just be there, be around, see what the competition's doing, so on and so forth. But then most importantly, our next event at Frontier House on April 18th, we are delighted to announce that we have the director of the Army Fuse program coming here to talk about all of the Army's pathways to go from Army Research Lab to Army Applications Lab through their mid-tier programs, which include SIBR, how they get into larger dollars in their technology maturation initiative, and then ultimately get into their PROC activities within the Army. They have done a great job stringing these things together. We're very fortunate to have them here. So keep an eye out for that on all the socials, so on and so forth. It's going to be a great event. It's coming up about a month from now. That will continue the pattern of excellence that we have had here. We were very fortunate last night to have the Assistant Secretary of State for Foreign Military Sales, the Honorable Mr. Carlin, was here talking all things FMS and the way forward. The catalog that they're going to be releasing here shortly that Secretary Carlin spoke about last night is a team effort between the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of War, and the Secretary of State, specifically in the offices like Acquisition and Sustainment and Secretary Carlin's Foreign Military Sales Office that deal with selling things overseas. That's forthcoming. We'll see it here shortly. Before that, we had the amazing Bonnie Evangeliste, OG of OTAs, basically made up Tradewinds Marketplace. She's phenomenal. You see the podcast on that. Before we had Devin Bohannon, PM for AppFit. If you got any ideas, if you think we should be talking to, interviewing, hosting people that would be of value to you, let us know. If not, we will move on to your actions that you should be doing next week. Here's your Monday playbook. If the president's budget comes out, read it. Don't wait for somebody else to interpret it for you. Find the things in the budget that you do. I'm telling you, the justifications of how the department talks about those things is gold for your proposals. You should be weaving their words into it, and the justification documents are immense. Know where your program lives, know how the department talks about it, which is how you should talk about it. This is what strategic communications really means, ladies and gentlemen. Second, get on a contract vehicle. I don't care which one. I do care which one. All of them. Get on everything that you can justify. OTAs, get on them. If they're open, bid. Put your proposal in. Get your name in the hat. Same thing with IDIQs. Bid, put in proposals to as many IDIQs as your little fingers can jam out in an applicable period of time. This is how money's moving. They're not moving on one-off contracts. They're going to be moving on big multiple award contracts because we have a lot of money, we have a lot of capabilities to deliver to warfighter, and we don't have a lot of time. Lastly, audit your supply chain, deal with your CMMC, and start preparing if you're in AI for whatever the hell CMMC for AI and ML is going to look like. Compliance, supply chain, vulnerabilities, these are the top concerns of defense leaders that I talk to all the time. Cyber and supply chain are going to kill a company's chances faster than your competition is, I promise you. So, in closing, Pentagon is moving money. Get your shit together or somebody else is going to get it. The more you know, the more you learn, the more you can sell, the better you can succeed in this environment. That's what we're here for. If there's something you want to know, there's a deep dive. If there's a subject that I missed, if there's any way, shape, or form that I can be helpful to help you do better for the warfighter, do the thing in the comments, the like, the subscribe, all the stuff. Obviously, I do this because I care. I do this for Sergeant Mike 25 fucking years ago that couldn't understand for the life of him why I went to SHOT Show. There was a million amazing things and I didn't have any of them. If there's something I could do to help the folks in the field, to help you get it to them, help me help you, let them know. If not, I'll see you next week.